Hi, this is Ren.
This is KC.
And this is All Walks of Film. So, I was really hoping that Garden Party was going to win the Oscar for Best Animated Short, but it went to Dear Basketball.
And if you've seen some of the outrage about Dear Basketball winning and wondered, well, what's everyone so upset about? Here's the problem. In the year of the metoo movement, in the aftermath of the Weinstein effect, on a year where specifically they're attempting, and in some cases very poorly, to highlight women, to discourage men who are known to be sexual harassers or to abuse women, to shy away from some of their systemically racist practices. You know, Oscars so white, that kind of thing. They've had some hiccups in attempting to do these things. You know, Emma Stone has to point out, there's 4 male directors and 1 female director. What's up with that? Well, ignoring the fact that 2 of the 4 men nominated were people of color. There was the whole mix-up where multiple sources confused Mirai Nagasu and Kelly Marie Tran, who look, I'm just going to say for the record, look nothing alike. I don't know how that's even possible that multiple sources got them mixed up. That happened. And then this was another one. So, Casey Affleck decided not to show up this year. The Oscars decided not to invite James Franco. And both of those charges are in a similar ballpark to what was going on with Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant was accused of rape in 2003, with very damning evidence produced in court until the accuser decided to drop the charges, possibly due in part to the large number of hate mail and death threats she was receiving at the time. And while that means technically, in a legal sense, he wasn't convicted, there was a lot of physical evidence that was produced in court. The testimony was very uncomfortable. And it still, like I said, is right in the same ballpark with, James Franco. You know, I don't understand this thing of, James Franco is, that's, we can't have you around. But Kobe Bryant, come on up and accept your Oscar for your very narcissistic movie that you decided to make.
Yeah, and I know that some people would like to bring up the idea of separate the art from the artist, and to a certain extent, yes, I did defend Casey Affleck last year. I was not as familiar with that case as I am now. In that case, you can still sort of separate his personal life from his professional life, at least for the case of Manchester by the Sea. It's still messed.
Let me
messed
pitch you like this. The thing that everyone is upset at Casey Affleck for is how he behaved on the set of his film where he was in charge and he was in control.
Right.
Manchester by the Sea was not that film. You know, it's a little bit different when it's not really your project and you're not really the powerhouse behind it.
Yeah.
Like it is with Kobe Bryant, where it's his movie and he created it and it's literally about him. And I'm going to be really jaded and say the only reason why he won this Oscar wasn't for the work of Glenn Keane, who is very talented, but is probably because a reporter made fun of Kobe Bryant for trying to make a short film, and it's a nice moment to rub it in a reporter's nose, like in a critic's nose, like, oh, see, you told him to just shut up and dribble and not to make a movie. Well, proving you wrong, we're gonna give him an Oscar for it. Done.
Yeah. The thing is in comparison to the other animated films, it's not as impressive, but I really don't want to get into that much because that's not really the issue here.
It's kind of the issue.
It
is kind of an issue that the movie doesn't really succeed on its own merit. Plus, you have this political baggage behind it.
Right. So, yeah, I was the least impressed with this film, and it was, essentially a glorified animatic.
Which I like. Not in this particular case, but in a lot of times I actually do like that style. It's a choice.
It's an artistic choice. But I don't know. At least for me, I think of this being a category that recognizes art pushing the medium forward. And in doing something like this, it's not really pushing the medium forward. either narratively or
Technically.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that also feeds into a larger problem with the way that the Oscars actually run their awards, with not having the proper people judge the proper movies, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, we'll get into that
Yeah,
later.
that's another story for another day. But it is kind of a problem that this movie that already had this big issue also was the weakest of the nominees. I mean, yeah, I would say it's the weakest because I didn't particularly care for Revolting Rhymes, but that was more ambitious. And on a technical level, the animation was a lot more creative.
Yeah, and I think part of it is exposure. They did make it available free online, and they did have glorified events where they had John Williams playing the score live as they presented it. So
and that's another part of the problem is which one of the creative teams behind their short was able to throw the most money into their short.
Yeah, I mean, Garden Party is definitely the most impressive from a technical standpoint. And it had a team of like 6 or 7 guys. And they were college students.
Mm-hmm. But do they have loads and loads of money to throw at promotion and into the pockets of the Oscar voters?
Well, yeah, and let's face it, a lot of people don't watch all the films. You know, and that's part of the problem, especially in the animation category, and we'll get into that a little bit later in another video. So I have some information from the Hollywood Reporter about the actual case, because I know that some people are like, oh, well, you know, it was vague and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so here it is. According to the court documents, the facts of June 30th, 2003 incident, which I'm quoting from
the actual document,
Gavin Polan of the Hollywood Reporter, which I refer that Bryant showed up at Cordera Spa in Edwards, Colorado, ahead of a knee surgery. A 19-year-old female concierge brought Kobe to his room. He asked her to return later to give him a tour of the hotel. She did so. At the end of the tour, he asked her to enter his room. She did. She said there was flirtation and consensual kissing. When he began groping her, she said, she tried to get away. He grabbed her by the neck, and she feared for her life. He bent her over the chair, removed her panties. She said twice that she begged him to stop, but he penetrated her anyway. She left about 5 minutes later. Her clothes were messed up. She was upset. There was blood on her panties and on his shirt. That blood matched her DNA. She told a friend at the hotel about the incident, and he drove her home. She told her mother. The next day, she went to the police. She was examined in a hospital, and the nurse recorded that she had a bruise on her neck and lacerations on her vaginal wall. The nurse deemed the lacerations to be evidence of rape.
I mean, that's not technically the way it's put. Technically, the closest thing to a positive in a rape test is proof of damage consistent with unconsensual sex.
Charges were filed, and the case followed a predictable path. Lawyers were hired. The defendant claimed sex was consensual. The victim was portrayed by the defense as a mentally ill slut who wanted to be famous. Another woman who said the defendant did the same thing to her refused to testify after seeing how the victim was smeared. The victim received a settlement and didn't testify, and the criminal case was dropped. And before the Harvey Weinstein metoo movement blew up, this is how most women were treated when this sort of thing happened.
Yep.
And this is why it is a big deal now.
And to be fair, this is how most people who try to come forward with a rape accusation are treated, male or female. There are a lot of men who have been treated the same way, too.
I will say the way that men are treated is a little bit different because usually it's mixed up with homophobia and ridicule.
But it's the same basic idea of we need to slander your character, we need to do some sort of like shaming of you as a person, we have to prove that you're morally incongruable, and then most importantly, there is definitely a you need to sit down and shut up about this kind of an attitude.
Yeah, and we thought that Hollywood was trying to move past this, and I will say that I was a little upset that certain people didn't have their Oscars revoked or their names removed, because honestly, as bad as this case is, they should have said that. They should have had the CEO of the Academy come out and say that Harvey Weinstein is no longer a part of this. Why couldn't they have done that? Are they afraid that it's too political already at the Oscars? That's not even political. That's, like somebody
but that's
did
actually doing something.
Yeah, exactly.
So much of the politics at the Oscars is just talking out of the side of your mouth and, showboating. Oh, aren't we, so progressive, while not really reflecting that. Moonlight winning Best Picture is one of the most progressive things that they have done in recent memory, like by a very, very large amount.
And Barry Jenkins and the whole crew got shafted, got their whole speech shafted because that whole moment robbed them.
There is such a thing as human error, which sucks, but the concept was one of the more progressive ideas. But with Moonlight, the more important thing than just, it's about, this, and this, and identity politics, more importantly, that was the best movie that came out that year. That, based on its merit, was the deserving film, But this has always just been what the Oscars do. Oh, are we so progressive? We're just going to talk out of one side of our mouth and then just act completely differently on the other side.
Well, I am curious. It's not something
that people care about there.
I am curious, and this is kind of an uncomfortable topic to bring up, but it was the only film among the nominees to be made in some part by a person of color. Do you think that affected its win?
Not really, because in case you couldn't tell, there wasn't actually a lot of emphasis on any sort of equality of representation for people of color this year. It was mostly women. And there wasn't a female-centric option.
I mean, you kind of have it with Revolting Rhymes just because of how much the story is centered around women.
But, I'm not really sure about the creative force or anything like that. But there's also a problem with the Oscars for being, really racist, even when they're trying really hard not to be racist. How many really upsettingly racist jokes were there during the Oscars So White Oscars?
Well, you can't talk about black people, but you can totally make Asian jokes.
Exactly. And that was, one of the focal points that was written into, the Oscar scripts. I just don't think that it's because they care about being progressive. I don't really think that's what it is. I think there's obviously a lot of money at play, and I honestly think it's just laziness. More likely than not, I don't truly believe that the Oscars thought, oh hey, Kobe Bryant, you raped a woman one time, let's reward you for that. I'm pretty sure that the Oscars just didn't pay attention.
Well, yeah, a lot of people were not familiar with this, as a lot of other cases were kind of put in the spotlight. What was put in the spotlight about Kobe Bryant this past year was that he retired.
Oh, so that also kind of falls into the category of, well, we're just going to give it to people before we can't give them an Oscar anymore.
And the case was brought up when he was retiring because there were people that had issue with it and have continued to have issue with it since the beginning of the case.
Well, the thing with the Weinstein scandal, really breaking loose, is that a lot of cases that have actually been attempted to be brought up and to be talked about more publicly and in a more mainstream setting and to really get their stories out that had been quieted for years and years and years were suddenly able to come out and actually be available, and people are stunned. They're like, what? And it's yeah, we've been trying to get the story out for years and now it's finally out.
Yeah, and I think in this case, if the Oscars wanted to do the progressive thing, but still have Kobe Bryant and Glenn Keane win for Dear Basketball, they could have just not had him come up on stage. I know that sounds crazy.
But he had to do the thing of, well, I know I'm supposed to shut up and dribble.
So what did you think of the animated films? Do you think that Dear Basketball deserved to win? What do you think of the Kobe Bryant case? Do you think that this sort of thing should be damning enough for somebody not to win an Oscar? Let us know in the comments below, and thanks for listening.